Official nominations. Votes on those are expected at 2 p.m. At 4, senators will join their House colleagues in the House chamber for a joint meeting to hear remarks from South Korean President Lee Myung-bak. Live coverage of the Senate now here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal God, hallowed be your name. Today, empower our lawmakers to run with patience the race that is set before them, looking to you, the author and finisher of their faith. Keep them from discouragement as you help them to be persistent in their efforts to meet today's challenges with faith and trust in you. Sustain them ever in your grace and bestow upon them your abundant spirit. Lord, give uncommon wisdom to the Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction as its members strive to forge a deficit reduction plan. Grant them wisdom and courage for the living of these days. We pray in your great name. Amen.
Thank you, Chaplain Black. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., October 13, 2011. To the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Tom Udall, a senator from the state of New Mexico, to perform the duties of the chair. Son Daniel K. Inouye, President Pro Tempore.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader is recognized.
Following leader remarks, the Senate will be in a morning business period until noon. Republicans will control the first 30 minutes, and the majority will control the final 30 minutes. At noon, the Senate will be in executive session to consider the Nathan, Hickey, and Forrest nominations, who are all nominated to be United States District Court judges. We expect 2 roll call votes around 2 p.m. in relation to these nominations. Additionally, there's a joint meeting of Congress today at 4 p.m. with the President of Korea. Senators will gather on the floor at 3:40 to proceed to the House, and we'll do that together. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that Nathan Engel, a fellow in my office, be granted 4 privileges for the duration of the consideration of H.R. 2112, Agriculture Appropriations Bill.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I would note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
The Republican leader is recognized.
I ask consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, later today, senators will have the opportunity to hear from South Korean President Lee, and I know we all look forward to it. South Korea is a stalwart ally that enjoys a flourishing economy. It's a shining example of how embracing democracy and free market principles can transform a society for good. Just imagine, in 50 years, they went from a civil war to a military dictatorship to an evolving democracy, and on the economic side, to a thriving capitalist country that has the 13th largest economy in the world. From a country that was a recipient of foreign aid and Peace Corps volunteers to a country with its own foreign aid program and its own Peace Corps, all of that in 50 years, right on the same peninsula with the one of the last Stalinist regimes in the world. A great success story that the United States had an awful lot to do with promoting. South Korean free trade agreement we passed last night overwhelmingly on a bipartisan basis will only make our two economies stronger. Our already strong alliance will be even stronger. These agreements should serve as an example of the kind of bipartisan legislation Congress should be focused on right now. Many of us have been amazed to witness, as I indicated earlier, the rapid growth and evolution of South Korea. Truly a remarkable accomplishment. So we welcome this great friend of the United States to our shores. We hope he and his wife have a memorable trip. As we face together the threat of North Korea and the rapid changes occurring in the strategic balance in Northeast Asia, we look forward to an even stronger alliance with South Korea in the years to come. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership...
Mr. President.
Yeah, the majority leader is recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I would just say, as my friend leaves, I know he has an appointment. The work that has been done the last few weeks in the Senate has been very, very important. We've been able to work on the FEMA bill, which we worked through the problems with that. China currency, we worked through that. And even though, as my friend, the distinguished Republican leader, knows, I didn't agree with the trade bills, what they do, I think it's a good sign of our working together. In spite of strong feelings on both sides, people put that aside. There were no dilatory efforts made to hold this up, and we move forward. I think that's commendable. That should be the pattern for the rest of this Congress. So, and I also want the record to be spread with the fact that as far as congressional action, this legislation would not have happened but for the Republican leader. He has been laser focused on this for a long time, and there were some things that we had to work through to get here, but one of the reasons that I did what I did to help move this along is because of his feelings about the importance of this legislation. Mr. President, we also need to focus on jobs. It's one of the most important things that we can do. I believe the most important thing we can do. I'm sorry that this week my Republican colleagues proved once again that the only jobs they care about are their own. They voted against a plan to create 2 million American jobs because they believed it was good Republican politics. Meanwhile, 14 million unemployed Americans are worried about how they're going to make their rent, put food on the table, and fill a gas tank, or how they're going to get another job interview. These 14 million Americans could care less who proposed the plan or who gets credit to get them back to work. The only thing they care about is that Congress gets to work putting them back to work. Ask whether they support a plan to ask millionaires to pay their fair share, to pay for tax cuts for middle-class families and small businesses, construction for roads, schools, and extension of employment benefits. Americans have overwhelmingly said yes. They support it. And the reason they do that, Mr. President, is because the newspaper articles we see around the country, the news stories, a quarter of U.S. millionaires pay taxes at a lower rate than some in the middle class. It's all over this. I mean, it's about a 17% average. That's really untoward. Mr. President, 2/3 of the Americans support both the plan the Republicans blocked this week and the way it's paid for. Yet still Republicans unanimously voted against these tax cuts, infrastructure investments, and jobs for teachers, police officers, and veterans. They voted, as I repeat, against 2 million jobs for American workers. My Republican colleagues pay lip service to the unemployment crisis in the country, but in the end, actions speak louder than words. As Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, the first African-American woman to be elected from the Deep South to Congress, once said, quote, "The citizens of America expect more. They deserve and they want more than a recital of problems." Close quotes. American people demand action. They deserve it. Mr. President, I would hope that my Republican colleagues have a plan to create jobs other than the constant talk about let's get rid of regulations. Let's lower taxes. Let's do some things together to create jobs. If my friends don't like what the President put forward, come forward with something that's constructive in nature. As Barbara Jordan said, citizens of America expect more. They deserve and they want more than a recital of problems. We can all come out here and recite the problems. There are lots of them. But let's work together to create some jobs. I was happy to hear from some of my Republican colleagues that they want to work together to create jobs. I told one of the senators, wonderful, grab any one of the Democrats. They'll work with you to help create these jobs. We need to do something. We don't need to continue to recite the problems. And please get off of this, I say to my Republican friends, about lowering taxes as a way to create jobs. If that, in fact, were the case, the Bush tax cuts would have put this country on an economic machine that could never have been driven so fast. But it didn't help. 8 million jobs were lost during the Bush years with these tax cuts. During the Clinton years, 23 million jobs were created. Let's stop the constant cry we need lower taxes. None of us are in favor of raising taxes, but certainly we need a fair tax distribution. And that's why the American people are agreeing with us. And we're willing to work on regulations. There are too many of them. We all agree with that. But let's look specifically at things that create jobs. You know, Mr. President, one of the big issues that we fought about last week was farm dust, okay? Farm dust. EPA doesn't regulate farm dust. They don't want to regulate farm dust. These are all just, as in the grocery business, lost leaders. It's only a way to confuse the American people. I repeat, EPA doesn't regulate farm dust. They don't want to regulate farm dust. Let's start talking about things that create jobs, that do things to put people back to work. We're going to continue to do everything we can not to let the American people down. We'll not stop working to pass the proposals contained in the Americans Job Act just because the Republicans have used every obstructionist trick in the book to stop it from moving forward. We'll continue to ask the richest Americans to share the burden of getting our economy back on track, and we'll never give up on the fight to create jobs for 14 million people in this country who are out of work. Remember, the Americans Jobs Act reduces taxes, Mr. President, for everybody except those that make more than $1 million a year.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 12 p.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the Republicans controlling the first 30 minutes and the majority controlling the second 30 minutes.
Mr. President.
Senator from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to, first of all, kind of tag on to the remarks of the leader for just a second. You know, one of the things I wish we would do in this body is get out of the business of demonizing certain segments of our population, and both sides are guilty of it from time to time. But I want to particularly talk about the major employer of the United States, small business, and the leader's reference to the 5.6% surtax. Documents show that 392,000 American small businesses would be impacted by a 5.6% surtax in order to pay for the President's jobs bills. Records show that 72% of the American people are employed by small business. You have to ask yourself this question. If you're really interested in creating jobs, Why would you target the job creator that creates 3/4 of the jobs in America and put a surtax on them? It just doesn't make any sense. If there was sincerity in that offer, those people would first and foremost of all be carved out on any punitive surtax, and we probably would have more employment. I just wanted to make that point, and I'll join anytime, any place, anywhere with the leader to work on creating jobs, because that is job one for the United States of America. I was a small businessman for 33 years, ran a small business for 22 years. I understand the heart and soul of small business, and today I come to the floor to talk about two small businesses in Georgia, and the effect of regulation on those small businesses and the decisions they have made this year that impact employment and the economy. One is a lovely lady named Susan Kolowich. Susan's a dear friend of my wife. My wife worked for her for 13 years, hasn't worked for her in the last 5 or 6 years. She opened a shop in East Cobb County in Marietta, Georgia, 23 years ago called C'est Moi. It is I. She loves France. She'd go to France every year and buy, and she'd bring back gifts which she sold in her gift shop. A successful small business for 23 years. So successful that her husband, Jim, who had been a Subway sandwich shop owner, decided to open a restaurant called Café du Paris and join it with her C'est Moi shop, so people could come and shop and eat and get a flavor of France. For 10 years, he ran the restaurant. For 23 years, she ran the store successfully. Difficult in the last 3 or 4 years because of the economy, but they stayed in business. But finally, she threw in the towel and sold the company. She sold her shop. Jim, her husband, sold his restaurant. And they sold them because they were up to here with the oppressive regulation of our government and the continued threats of things just exactly like the surtax on their small business at a time in which sales are very difficult. Now, that's not an abstract story. That's the truth. And I'm sure it's happening in Mississippi. And I'm sure it's happening in Wyoming. Let me talk about a little bit larger small business. Hennessy Jaguar and Hennessy Land Rover in Atlanta, Georgia. One of the principals in it is a guy named Steve Hennessy. Steve's a good friend of mine. And January 3rd of this year, I went to the OK Cafe in Atlanta to meet a couple for a meeting about some legislation. Walked in. It's kind of the watering hole for breakfast in Atlanta. Everybody that's anybody kind of goes there, and it's a great place to eat. When I walked in the door and walked past the cash register where you could see out into the cafe to see if my guests that I was going to meet with were there, Steve spotted me. I wasn't going to meet with him, and he jumped up and said, "Johnny, I need to talk to you now." He ran across the restaurant. I thought he was going to give me a bear hug. He looked so excited. He got up close, and he put his index finger right on my chin, and he said, "I just fired a salesman and hired 2 compliance officers to comply with the credit requirements of Dodd-Frank." So regulation did create 2 jobs. It created 2 compliance officers, but it cost a salesman. Well, if you're punishing the salesman and rewarding the compliance officer, the economy is going to go straight down because you're punishing productivity. You're punishing job creation for the sake of regulatory compliance. Now, some regulation is good. I believe our job as legislators is to see to it that we mitigate risk for the American people. But this administration appears to think its job is to eliminate risk. Well, if you eliminate risk, you stay in bed when you get up in the morning, you stay there till night, you don't do anything because you don't take a risk. Capitalism is about risk. Risk and reward is about our system of our economy. So when people talk about regulatory oppression, that's 2 stories in Atlanta, Georgia, where regulation has actually caused 2 businesses to be sold and jobs to be lost, and another business to hire 2 people to comply with government regulation and fire somebody who was in sales. It is backwards at best, and it is wrong. So I hope the leader, who did make an acknowledgement that he wanted to mitigate regulation, let's sit down and let's find out what we need to do. Let's call a timeout. Let's do what Senator Collins of Maine said. Let's take a timeout for a year. Let's try and digest and absorb the regulations that we've passed without continuing to put more threatening regulations on top of business at a time when we have 9.1% unemployment in America, and in my state we've got 10.2%. It's time for us to be proactive on taking the shackles off American small business, not threaten them with surtaxes and not oppress them with regulation. But instead, let's work to empower small business to help us come out of this recession. Now, my dear friend, the physician from the great state of Wyoming, I think wants to address precisely the same subject I am, Senator Barrasso.
The senator from Wyoming is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm delighted to be joining my colleague, Senator Isaacson from Georgia. Senator Wicker is here, also from Mississippi, and we think this is very important. The leader started talking about today. He said we need to focus on jobs. That's what we've wanted to focus on for all of the time of the Obama administration. But no, the president ignored jobs his first year in office, ignored jobs his second year in office. Here we are more than halfway through his third year in office, and finally the president has noticed what's been on the minds of the American people. This is a president and a majority leader who forced through this body a health care law that's bad for patients, bad for providers, the nurses and doctors who take care of those patients, bad for taxpayers, ignoring what the American people said they wanted to focus on, which was jobs, the economy, the debt, the spending. We see a majority leader who led this body through adding more to the debt. Now, $14 trillion in debt, more spending, more money that's owed to China, and we need to put Americans to work. We need to get Americans back to work. The majority leader talked about 14 million Americans looking for jobs. There are over 4 million who haven't worked for over a year. In that kind of a situation, it's going to be a lot harder for those folks to ever get a job again. And the regulations just keep on coming. A month ago, the president came to the Hill, visited, and had a joint session of Congress. He said, I want to get rid of some of these regulations. He said, I can identify regulations. They came out with a list of about $4 billion worth of regulations to lower the cost of business over the next 5 years. But in the month of September alone, this administration came out with 230 proposed rules and 338 final rules. And if you go to what this administration says that those rules are going to cost the people of this country, cost the job creators of this country, even the administration using their own numbers, that cost is going to be $10 billion. And I heard our colleague from Georgia talk about the paperwork, the new compliance officers. Just yesterday, this administration came out under Dodd-Frank with new rules and regulations, proposed rules. They took only 11 pages of this massive bill, but only 11 pages. And when you look at the 298 pages of proposed rules that come out, what do the government regulators, the Obama administrated regulators, say that it is going to cost the businesses of this country in terms of man-hours having to be spent to comply with the paperwork? These aren't my numbers. These aren't Senator Isaacson's numbers. These aren't Senator Wicker's numbers. 6,283,000 hours of paperwork. That's what the government experts say is going to have to spend on paperwork to comply with one component of the Dodd-Frank law. How is that going to help? How is that kind of a drag on a society going to help create jobs? You know, the president says if the Republicans have ideas, we want to hear them. The majority leader today stood here and said if the Republicans have ideas, we want to hear them. Well, a month ago to this day, when the president came to the Hill, earlier that morning, a number of colleagues, House and Senate members, came to to talk about a Western Caucus jobs frontier bill. A number of bills that Republicans have proposed, breaking down Washington's barriers to America's red, white, and blue jobs. The majority leader says we ought to spend more money. The president says we ought to spend more money. The president talked about his so-called stimulus plan. He said it was going to save or create 3.5 million jobs. We've lost millions of jobs since this president has come into office. The president talked about green jobs. He said that his policies, his clean energy policies, would create 5 million new jobs. We've just seen the Solyndra situation. 1,100 people fired because of bad bets by this administration. This administration shouldn't be betting with the taxpayers' money. It's not the administration's money. It's not the president's money. That's why the American people are so up in arms. They see what all of this spending is doing, and it is not helping jobs. And I see my colleague from Mississippi here, and we can go back and forth and talk about this. I know you have examples and situations in Mississippi. I see them in Wyoming all of the time, people having to deal with the red tape coming out of Washington. The president talks a pretty good game. When you look at what's happening out there, the American people are very disappointed. The American people deserve better than what they're getting from this administration. So I'd ask my colleague from Mississippi? Are there things that you see happening to your friends and your neighbors at home that we need to share with the rest of the country?
Well, there's no question about it, and I appreciate my two friends coming down and helping with this colloquy today. And there are two companies that I want to talk about in just a moment. But let me say at the outset, we all want to create jobs for Americans. There's no question about it. The President came into office wanting to create jobs. The problem is he hasn't let history be a guide, and if we go ahead with this second stimulus bill, we will be following the same failed programs that not only have not created jobs for Americans, but as a matter of fact, the policies have made things worse for Americans and for job creation. The President's proposal and the proposal that the Majority Leader just embraced is a spend now, pay later approach, and it's one that has been proven not to work. 3 years after we tried this at the beginning of the President's term, we have not put more Americans back to work, and this should be a glaring reminder of the failures of the first stimulus package and the probability and likelihood that this second stimulus package would be met with the same result. What we have seen since the first stimulus, the federal debt has skyrocketed. There are nearly 2 million fewer jobs, and economic growth is limping along at a meager 1%. So many other countries have a higher GDP growth than that, and it is tragic that our country has not kept up. The unemployment rate has hovered at 9% for 30 months in a row, and if you add in those who have given up looking for work or settled for part-time work, that number skyrockets from around 9% unemployment, which is an unspeakable number, to some 16%. In fact, some 6 million people have been without a job for more than 6 months. So we know that the President's policies are not working. We've seen very, very slow movement. And frankly, in many instances, that movement has been backwards. The big government approach of spend now and pay later has simply been a wet blanket for America's job creators. Now, the fact is, there are some things that we can agree on. We must approach, in this time of divided government, we must approach the idea of job creation in a bipartisan manner. The House of Representatives is controlled by Republicans. This body is controlled by Democrats. The executive branch, including the regulatory regime in this country, is strictly controlled by the Democratic Party. So we need to work together in a step-by-step approach. I think a comprehensive package of pass this bill immediately without amendments, I think that's been rejected by both Democrats and Republicans in this city, and we now need to embark on a step-by-step approach, and we can be quick about it. One example was yesterday. When we finally got around to it, the House of Representatives passed the trade bills once the President sent them to us. That was done yesterday afternoon. By 7 or 8 last evening, the United States Senate had passed all of these trade agreements on a huge bipartisan basis. So this is a step in the right direction. There are other things that we can do, but I want to commend the President for finally sending the trade bills to the United States Congress and for getting that done and opening up the new markets. So that's a step. Now, the gentleman from Georgia mentioned some companies and some potential job creators in his state. My friend from Wyoming asked me to talk about examples in Mississippi. Actually, my wife Gail and I had an opportunity to participate in a christening of some boats in Gulfport, Mississippi, just day before yesterday. This was at the construction area of Trinity Yachts. Now, I know the initial reaction is, you know, why should we be concerned with yachts? I tell you why we should be concerned with yachts, is we employ thousands upon thousands of Americans building those yachts. You know, I'll never own a yacht. I don't aspire to even travel on a yacht. But I'm glad somebody, there are a bunch of people around the world that want to buy them, because we employ 1,000 people just at Trinity Yachts, and we'd like to increase that. As a matter of fact, what we helped christen just the day before yesterday was not a yacht at all. It was 2 tugboats. Trinity Yacht makes tugboats, and they will be helping bring liquefied natural gas into the port of Pascagoula. So this shipyard built the tugs. Signet Maritime bought the tugs, and they will be creating jobs in Gulfport, be creating jobs at the port of Pascagoula, and they'd like to create a lot more jobs. I was told by the management and ownership of Trinity Yachts that business is a little soft in the shipyard, but if the President would simply go back to what we used to have in terms of oil and gas permitting, if we would lift this de facto ban on oil wells in the Gulf of Mexico and just get back to the business that we had year before last, then business could be great guns at Trinity Yachts. We're not talking about yachts being constructed by Trinity. We're talking about oil and gas drilling platforms. The quicker permits and drilling projects in the Gulf of Mexico could bring about more than 200,000 new jobs in the next year. That's a job creator proposal that is simple. All we need to do is enforce the law that is currently on the books and get back to permitting so we can get back to producing our own energy. The oil and natural gas sector is responsible for 9 million jobs, according to the Congressional Research Service. And we have in America the largest recoverable stores of natural gas, oil, and coal on the earth. So if you want to know another Republican proposal, which really is a bipartisan proposal when you get down to it, because our Gulf Coast delegation consists of Republicans and Democrats, then here is a concrete proposal. Let's get back to producing our own energy resources in the Gulf of Mexico and elsewhere in the United States of America. 9 million jobs, and it could be more.
The gentleman from Mississippi just jogged my memory, and I want to jog his because he was in the United States House of Representatives in 1993, if I'm not mistaken. I got there in 1999. But I remember the first year of the Clinton administration when they put a luxury tax on yachts, and the yacht construction business went out of business and thousands of jobs were left. Now, I don't know if Trinity is a sub-S. I don't know if it's an LLC. I don't know if it's a sole proprietorship, but it probably is one of those 3 types of corporations, and I'm sure it's a small business. Well, they're going to have a 5.6% surtax on their income because of what the proposals the President has to allegedly pay for a jobs bill. So this is deja vu all over again. The administration's proposing more taxes to pay for government jobs, but take the money out of the pockets of small businesses that create the jobs in America. Trinity Yachts, and we'll do some research and find out if that's true because I don't know the company, but I'll bet you they're one of the ones that pay their taxes as if they were an individual, and they would be affected by the tax the President's proposing, just like the yachting industry was put out of business in 1993 because of the Clinton tax until the Republicans took over in 94 and reformed the tax code and cut federal spending.
The point is, there are a bunch of average, hardworking Mississippians, average, hardworking Americans who are glad to come to work each day, working hard to build these boats, and we ought to encourage them. And no, I don't know the corporate structure of that particular job creator, but I know the larger point is that many of the job creators do pay the taxes at the individual level. And we know from research that 4 out of 5 of the taxpayers who would pay the higher taxes being proposed by the President are business owners, the very people that we're hoping will create jobs and create them soon for Americans.
I want to thank the gentleman from Mississippi for his stories, which are true and to the point. My story is about 2 small businesses. I want to thank the physician from the great state of Wyoming for his contribution. Do you have an addition to add, Senator Bryce?
It just seems to me, and I know you see this in Georgia, you see this in Mississippi, we know what doesn't work. And we know what doesn't work is more borrowing and more spending and over-regulation and the threat of raising taxes on people and the job creators of this country. So there is much to be done. And that's why we actually come out with this jobs frontier, the Western Caucus did, because we want to increase affordable American energy. And the President, when he was running for office, said under his proposals that electricity costs would necessarily skyrocket. If you want a productive, vibrant economy, you need low-cost energy. And if you want a secure nation, you need American energy to do that. So when my colleague from the Gulf state of Mississippi talks about energy in the Gulf, there's a lot there. I can talk from Wyoming from the standpoint of energy available on federal land, which is being blocked by regulations. We ought to be exploring for that energy as well as in Alaska. So there is much we can do to make our country stronger, safer, more secure, better, more vibrant. But the proposal put forth by the President, which to me, I agree with my colleague from Mississippi, was another spending bill. Just spending, as our first stimulus was, a bill that is not going to do what we need to do to get this economy going in a vibrant sense. So number one is we ought to stop doing what we know doesn't work.
Well, I want to conclude. If Senator Mississippi have anything to add.
Well, just to say this, and I'll take a minute to say this, and then I'll thank my friend from Georgia for taking the lead on this colloquy. We also need to show job creators that we're actually serious about fixing our fiscal house. And, you know, we've had the Gang of Six, we've had the Simpson-Bowles Commission, we've had Dr. Coburn and Senator Lieberman with a proposal. We have Alice Rivlin's proposal, an expert on budgetary matters. We know the solutions that are out there. They're hard to do politically. They would subject us all to intense political criticism and a firestorm. But if we do it on a bipartisan basis, for the good of this country now, for the good of not only job creators today and people out there who are dying to come back to work, but also for future generations, then we can do the right thing. And I would simply say this. I call on the President of the United States to give us some leadership on working together on a bipartisan basis to make these tough decisions. If we do it together, like Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did in the 80s, we can make the case to the American people that sometimes you have to do hard things, but we do things on a bipartisan basis to create jobs and to make a better future for future generations. It will not be done unless the Chief Executive of the United States of America comes forward and signals a willingness to hold hands with us and do the right thing for the future. And I desperately hope in these final months of 2011 we can get that signal sent to the Committee of 12 and that we can work together to make major, significant structural change that will save our fiscal future. I thank my colleague.
I want to thank the gentleman from Mississippi, and I'll close by simply saying you've heard 3 Republicans this morning talk about differences we might have on regulation and on tax policy. But you've also heard the distinguished gentleman from Mississippi, the doctor and physician from Wyoming, and myself from the state of Georgia say we are ready. we're willing and we're hopeful that we can sit down together as a Congress, not as a partisan Congress, but as a bipartisan Congress, and find solutions to the regulatory problems, and find incentives for business to invest, and find ways that we can create jobs in the private sector, because in the end, that's where job creation takes place. So I will end with where Senator Reid started in his remarks. Yesterday was a landmark day. Republicans and Democrats came together and passed 3 free trade agreements which will create jobs in the United States of America. Our problem is we waited almost 1,000 days to do it. Let's start accelerating those decisions that must be made to bring us together. Let's find ways to cut our spending, find ways to empower our business, find ways to regulate in a positive way, but not in a suppressive and an oppressive way on American small business. Senator Wicker, Senator Brasso, and Senator Isaacson for 3 stand ready to join and do that anytime, any place, anywhere. And I yield back the floor. Of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like permission to...
The Senate is currently in a quorum call.
May I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be lifted?
Without objection.
And may I ask unanimous consent that I be allowed to speak for 15 minutes in morning business?
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I'm here to speak about what is currently an unpopular topic in this town. It has become no longer politically correct in certain circles in Washington to speak about climate change or carbon pollution or how carbon pollution is causing our climate to change. This is a peculiar condition of Washington. If you go out into our, say, military and intelligence communities, they understand and are planning for the effects of our carbon pollution on climate change. They see it as a national security risk. If you go out into our at least non-polluting business and financial community, they see this as a real and important problem, and of course it goes without saying that our scientific community is all over this concern. But like I said, Washington is a peculiar place, and here it is getting very little traction. Here, where the dark hand of the polluters can tap so many shoulders, and where there is power and money behind that dark hand, and therefore a lot of attention paid to that little tap on the shoulder. What we overlook is that nature, God's earth, is also tapping us all on the shoulder with messages that we ignore at our peril. We ignore the messages of nature, of God's earth, and we ignore the laws of nature, of God's earth, at our very grave peril. There is a wave of very justifiable economic frustration that has swept through our capital. The problem is that some of the special interests, the polluters, have insinuated themselves into that wave, sort of like parasites that creep into the body of a host animal. And from there, they are working terrible mischief. They are propagating 2 big lies. One is that environmental regulations are a burden to the economy, and we need to lift those burdens to spur our economic recovery. The second is the jury is still out on climate changes caused by carbon pollution, so we don't need to worry about it or even take precautions. Both are, frankly, outright false. Environmental regulation is well established to be good for the economy. It may add costs to you if you are a polluter, but polluters usually exaggerate about that. For instance, before the 1990 acid rain rules went into effect, Peabody Coal estimated that compliance would cost $3.9 billion. The Edison Electric Institute chimed in and estimated that compliance would cost $4 to $5 billion. Well, in fact, the Energy Information Administration calculated the program actually cost $836 million, about 1/6 of the Edison Electric Institute estimate. When polluters were required to phase out the chemicals that they were emitting that were literally burning a hole through our Earth's atmosphere, they warned that it would create, and I quote, severe economic and social disruption due to, and I quote again, shutdowns of refrigeration equipment in supermarkets, office buildings, hotels, and hospitals. Well, in fact, the phase-out happened 4 to 6 years faster than predicted. It cost 30% less than predicted. And the American refrigeration industry innovated and created new export markets for its environmentally friendly products. And anyway, the real point here is that we're not just in this chamber to represent the polluters. We're supposed to be here to represent all Americans. And Americans benefit from environmental regulation big time. Over the lifetime of the Clean Air Act, for instance, for every $1 that it cost to add on pollution controls, Americans have received about $30 in health and other benefits. And by the way, installing those pollution controls created jobs because they went to manufacturers to build the controls and to Americans to install them. But setting that aside, a 30-to-1 benefit ratio to keep our air clean, that sounds like a mighty wise investment to me. And that 30-to-1 ratio doesn't even count the intangible benefits, intangible but very real benefits of clean air and clean water, the benefits of the heart and the soul, the benefits to a grandfather of taking his granddaughter to the fishing hole and still finding fish there, or of the city kid being able to go to a beach and have it clean enough to swim there, or the benefit to a mom who is spared the burden of worry of sitting next to her asthmatic baby on the emergency room albuterol inhaler waiting for his infant lungs to clear. Well, unfortunately, polluters rule in certain circles in Washington, and they emit propaganda as well as pollution, and they've been emitting too much of both lately. Their other big lie is that the jury is still out on whether human-made carbon pollution causes dangerous climate changes and oceanic changes. Virtually all of our most prestigious scientific and academic institutions have stated that climate change is happening and that human activities are the driving cause of this change. Many of us here in Congress received a letter from those institutions in October of 2009. Let me quote from that letter. Observations throughout the world make it clear that climate change is occurring, and rigorous scientific research demonstrates that the greenhouse gases emitted by human activities are the primary driver. These conclusions are based on multiple independent lines of evidence, and contrary assertions are inconsistent with an objective assessment of the vast body of peer-reviewed science. Let me repeat that last quote. Contrary assertions are inconsistent with an objective assessment of the vast body of peer-reviewed science. This letter was signed by the heads of the following organizations: the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Chemical Society, the American Geophysical Union, the American Institute of Biological Sciences, the American Meteorological Society, the American Society of Agronomy, the American Society of Plant Biologists, the American Statistical Association, the Association of Ecosystem Research Centers, the Botanical Society of America, the Crop Science Society of America, the Ecological Society of America, the Natural Science Collections Alliance, the Organization of Biological Field Stations, the Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics, the Society of Systematic Biologists, the Soil Science Society of America, and the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research. These are highly esteemed scientific organizations. They are the real deal. They don't think the jury's still out. They recognize that, in fact, the verdict is in, and it's time to act. More than 97% of the climate scientists most actively publishing accept that the verdict is actually in on carbon pollution causing climate and oceanic changes. 97%. Think of that. Imagine if your child were sick and the doctor said she needed treatment, and out of prudence you went and got a second opinion. And then you went around and you actually got 99 second opinions. And when you were done, you found that 97 out of 100 expert doctors agreed your child was sick and she needed treatment. Imagine further that of the 3 who disagreed, some took money from the insurance company that would have to pay for your child's treatment. And imagine further that none of those 3 could say that they were sure your child was okay, just that they weren't sure what her illness was or that she needed treatment, that there was some doubt. On those facts, name one decent father or mother who wouldn't start treatment for their child. No decent parent would turn away from the considered judgment of 97% of 100 doctors just because they weren't all absolutely certain. How solid is the science behind this? Rock solid. The fact that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere absorbs heat from the sun was discovered at the time of the Civil War. This is not new stuff. In 1863, the Irish scientist John Tyndall determined that carbon dioxide and water vapor trapped more heat in the atmosphere as their concentrations increased. A 1955 textbook, Our Astonishing Atmosphere, notes that nearly a century ago, the scientist John Tyndall suggested that a fall in the atmospheric carbon dioxide could allow the Earth to cool, whereas a rise in carbon dioxide would make it warmer. In the early 1900s, a century ago, it became clear that changes in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere might account for significant increases and decreases in the Earth's annual average temperatures, and that carbon dioxide released from man-made sources, anthropogenic sources, primarily by the burning of coal, would contribute to those atmospheric changes. This is not new stuff. These are well-established scientific principles. Let me look for a moment at the book that I talked about, Our Astonishing Atmosphere, published in 1955, the year I was born, more than half a century ago, for the Science for Everyman series. Let me read. Although the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere remains at a concentration of 0.03% all over the world, the amount in the air has not always been the same. There have been periods in the world's history when the air became charged with more carbon dioxide than it now carries. There have also been periods when the concentration has fallen unusually low. The effects of these changes have been profound. They are believed to have influenced the climate of the Earth by controlling the amount of energy that is lost by the Earth into space. Nearly a century ago, the British scientist John Tyndall suggested that a fall in the atmospheric carbon dioxide could allow the Earth to cool, whereas a rise in carbon dioxide would make it warmer. With the help of its carbon dioxide, the atmosphere acts like a greenhouse that traps the heat of the sun. Radiations reaching the atmosphere as sunshine can penetrate to the surface of the Earth. Here they are absorbed, providing the world with warmth. But the Earth itself is radiating energy outwards in the form of long-wave heat rays. If these could penetrate the air as the sunshine does, they would carry off much of the heat provided by the sun. Carbon dioxide in the air helps to stop the escape of heat radiations. It acts like a blanket to keep the world warm. And the more carbon dioxide the air contains, the more efficiently does it smother the escape of the Earth's heat. Fluctuation in the carbon dioxide of the air has helped to bring about major climate changes experienced by the world in the past. This is 1955. This is our astonishing atmosphere out of the Science for Everyman series. This is not something that was just invented. Let's look at the facts that we actually observe in our changing planet. Over the last 800,000 years, 8,000 centuries, until very recently, the atmosphere has stayed within a bandwidth of between 170 parts per million and 300 parts per million of carbon dioxide. That's not theory, that's measurement. Scientists measure historic carbon dioxide concentrations by, for example, locating trapped bubbles in the ice of ancient glaciers. So we know over time and over long periods of time what the range has been. What else do we know? We know that since the Industrial Revolution, we, humankind, have been burning carbon-rich fuels in measurable and ever-increasing amounts. We know that we release up to 7 to 8 gigatons of carbon dioxide each year. A gigaton, by the way, is a billion with a B, billion metric tons. So if you're going to release 7 to 8 billion metric tons a year into the atmosphere, predictably, that increases carbon concentration in our atmosphere. Put more in and find more there is not a complex scientific theory. It is not a difficult proposition. And 7 to 8 billion metric tons a year into the atmosphere is a very big thing in the historical sweep. So we now measure carbon concentrations climbing in the Earth's atmosphere. Again, this is a measurement, not a theory. The present concentration exceeds 390 parts per million. May I ask permission to extend my remarks for 5 minutes?
Without objection.
I thank you, and I thank the Senator from Arkansas for his courtesy. So we're now over, 800,000 years in a bandwidth of 170 to 300 parts per million, and now we're over 390. This increase has a trajectory. Plotting trajectories is nothing new either. It's something scientists, business people, and our military services do every day. The trajectory for our carbon pollution predicts that 688 parts per million will be in the atmosphere in the year 2095 and 1,097 parts per million in the year 2195. These are carbon concentrations not outside of the bounds of 800,000 years, but outside of the bounds of millions of years. And as Tyndall determined at the time of the Civil War, increasing carbon concentrations will absorb more of the sun's heat and raise global temperatures. Let me end by reviewing the scale of the peril that we are facing if we fail to act. Over the last 800,000 years, as I said, it's been 170 to 300 parts per million of carbon dioxide. Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, that concentration is now up to 390 parts per million. If we continue on the trajectory that we find ourselves, our grandchildren will see carbon concentrations in the atmosphere top 700 parts per million by the end of the century, twice the bandwidth top that we've lived in for 8,000 centuries. To put that in perspective, mankind has engaged in agriculture for about 10,000 years. 800,000 years ago, it's not clear we'd yet mastered fire. The entire development of human civilization has taken place in that 800,000 years, and within that 170 to 300 parts per million bandwidth. And if you go back millions of years, you're back into geologic time. In April of this year, a group of scientific experts came together at the University of Oxford to discuss the current state of our oceans. The workshop report stated that, and I quote, "Human actions have resulted in warming and acidification of the oceans and are now causing increasing hypoxia." Acidification is obvious. The ocean is becoming more acid. Hypoxia means low oxygen levels. Studies of the Earth's past indicate that these are the three symptoms associated with each of the previous 5 mass extinctions on Earth. Mr. President, we experienced 2 mass ocean extinctions 55 and 251 million years ago. The rates of carbon entering the atmosphere in the lead-up to these extinctions are estimated to have been 2.2 and 1 to 2 gigatons of carbon per year, respectively, over several thousand years. As the group of Oxford scientists noted, both these estimates are dwarfed in comparison to today's emissions, which, as I said earlier, are 7 to 8 gigatons per year. The workshop participants concluded with this quote, "Unless action is taken now, the consequences of our activities are at a high risk of causing, through the combined effects of climate change, overexploitation, pollution, and habitat loss, the next globally significant extinction event in the ocean." Mr. President, the laws of physics and the laws of chemistry and the laws of science, these are laws of nature. These are laws of God's earth. We can repeal some laws around here, but we can't repeal those. Senators are used to our opinions mattering a lot around here, but these laws are not affected by our opinions. These laws don't care who peddles influence, how many lobbyists you have, or how big your corporate bankroll is. Those considerations, so important in this town, don't matter at all to the laws of nature. And as regards these laws of nature, because we can neither repeal nor influence them, we bear a duty of stewardship to see and respond to the facts that are before our faces according to nature's laws. We bear a duty to shun the siren song of well-paying polluters. We bear a duty to make the right decisions for our children and grandchildren and for our God-given earth. Right now, I must come before this chamber and remind this body that we are failing in that duty. The men and women in this chamber are indeed catastrophically failing in that duty. We are earning the scorn and condemnation of history. Not this week, perhaps, and not next week. The spin doctors can see to that. But ultimately and assuredly, the harsh judgment that it is history's power to inflict on wrong will fall upon us. The Supreme Being who gave us this earth and its abundance created a world not just of abundance but of consequence. And that Supreme Being gave us reason to allow us to plan for and foresee the various consequences that those laws of nature impose. It is magical thinking to imagine that somehow we will be spared the plain and foreseeable consequences of our failure of duty. There is no wizard's hat and wand, Mr. President, with which to wish this away. These laws of nature are known. The Earth's message to us is clear. Our failure is blameworthy. Its consequences are profound, and the costs will be very, very high. Mr. President, I thank you and thank the senator from Arkansas for his indulgence with the extra time, and I yield the floor.